Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts, America's Still Beautiful podcast, a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts, America's Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today.
Welcome to GSMC, America's Still Beautiful podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Alyssa Jo. Hello, everybody. How is it going today? I hope you're having a wonderful day so far. Welcome back to another episode of America's Still Beautiful. I am excited to be here, like always. I'm going to share lots of uplifting, positive stories with you. I hope you had a wonderful weekend. Happy Monday if you're listening to this on the day it comes out. You guys know how much I love my Mondays. I just find Mondays so exciting. It's just like a fresh start. Well, every single day is kind of like a fresh start, but Mondays are just like an extra fresh start. I think some of you can agree with me. Anyways, I hope you've been having an awesome weekend and you've had an awesome day so far. If you're feeling a little bit down or maybe, something didn't go quite your way this weekend, don't you worry. I am here to uplift your mood and fill you with lots of feel-good, positive news. So throw away those old negative news headlines and let's just jump right into all the feel-good stuff that we love to hear. So I have some cool ones today. I got some new studies. I got some positive things about the pandemic, all those fun things. I got a cool little love story for you. Basically all of my favorite types of stories. I'm going to fill them in today's episode. So here we go. The first one I'm going to share with you is a study. And this study reveals the perfect number of extra minutes of sleep per night that can help you improve your mindfulness. There is a magic number, and that number is 29 minutes each night can be the key to improving your mindfulness, which is, of course, a critical resource that has benefits for daily well-being and your work performance, as we all know. Mindfulness is achieved by, of course, purposely bringing your individual awareness and attention to experiences occurring in the present moment, without forming an opinion. Not the easiest thing to do. So there has been some other studies some previous studies, and they looked at how multiple dimensions of nightly sleep impact daily mindfulness rather than just focusing on sleep quality or duration. So now this new study that was led by the University of South Florida, they found better sleep improves next day mindfulness, which in turn reduces sleepiness during the day. So the research focuses on nurses, the largest group of healthcare professionals whose need for optimal sleep and mindful attention are particularly high, and sleep problems are common in this population due to the long shifts and the lack of situational control and the close proximity to life-threatening health conditions. So their optimal sleep health and mindful attention are particularly important as they work the front line, of course, of the COVID-19 pandemic. So this is pretty cool. They say one can be awake and alert, but not necessarily mindful. Similarly, one can be tired or in low arousal, but still can be mindful. So mindful attention is beyond being just awake. It indicates attentional control and self-regulation that facilitates sensitivity and adaptive adjustment to environmental and internal cues, which are essential when providing mindful care to patients and effectively dealing with stressful situations. So Lee and her colleagues from USF and Moffitt Cancer Center, they followed 61 nurses for 2 weeks and examined multiple characteristics of sleep health. They found that nurses' mindful attention was greater than their usual after nights with greater sleep sufficiency, better sleep quality, low efficiency, and longer sleep duration, so an extra half hour longer. Daily mindful attention contributed to 2 less same-day sleepiness. Those with greater mindful attention were also 66% less likely to experience symptoms of insomnia during the 2-week study period. So researchers come to these conclusions by using a variety of tools to measure how much participants were mindful each day, each daily moment, and how their mental states were impacted by their sleep. So participants were prompted to answer daily mindfulness and sleepiness questions 3 times a day for 2 weeks using this smartphone application. It's called Real Life Expo. And the daily mindfulness was measured by the Mindful Attention Awareness Scale. So that asked some questions. So some of the questions that they were asked was, I was doing something automatically without being aware of what I was doing. I was finding it difficult to stay focused on what was happening. Participants also wore an ActiWatch Spectrum device for the same 2 weeks that measured their wrist movement activity to quantify sleep and wake patterns. So findings from this study provide insight into developing a behavioral health intervention strategy for a broader array of people, especially the healthcare workers who need better sleep and mindful attention. So given the association between mindful attention and better patient care, improving sleep in this population may provide important benefits to patient health outcomes as well. So there you go. That is all from the University of Southern Florida. There is some more information on that, and they're just releasing this study into some journals. So if you want to find out some more information about those 29 minutes of precious sleep that can make you more mindful, definitely search it up online. There's so much information about it. Now, I have a little cool story about the pandemic and the lockdown, and you're like, what, Alyssa Jo? A cool story about the pandemic? Yes. Believe it or not, there are still some positive stories. You guys know how I like to at least try to throw one positive story about the pandemic into the episodes these days. So with that all being said, during all the lockdowns, citizen science programs have just skyrocketed. So programs like eBird, NestWatch, SciStarter, they've all seen dramatic increases in users since the states began to lock down in March. So it's giving conservationists a wealth of data to help make data sets that might be used to protect birds and insect species, so like the butterflies and dragonflies. I remember sharing a story with you guys on this podcast about the guy who's been spending his time taking pictures of butterflies, and the pictures that he has captured has just been unbelievable. So this is kind of on the same realm of things. So NestWatch and eBird capitalize on the enthusiasm of local bird watchers to provide a lot of the information to scientists about populations in areas that ornithology departments at universities don't have funding to plan expeditions for. And these apps actually experience 41% and 29% increases this year compared to 2019. So COVID-19 has forced a lot of scientific expeditions to be postponed. So naturalists are heavily relying on citizen science programs to keep track of insect and bird populations. So if you are somebody that is interested in this kind of stuff, definitely sign up for NestWatch or eBird or SciStarter so that you can kind of put in your data and help those scientists. In Northern Virginia, a group called Occoquan Bay Meadows Surveys. They delivered citizen science reports for 30 years, and it played a big part in the creation of the Occoquan Bay National Wildlife Refuge, which is less than an hour from the nation's capital. So they say you don't know what's there until you know it's there. That's what repetitive surveys can do. Peel away one layer after another of nature so you just see a little bit deeper into what it's all about. So Jim Wagner, he is 84 years old, and he founded the survey group 3 decades ago. And he says that due to the high number of seniors present in his field expeditions, social distancing and other COVID-19 measures make it a little bit more difficult to conduct different kinds of field work, so such as looking at flowers and insects in close proximity, which is especially relevant because the naturalist is seeing a significant increase in new faces joining him in the field. He also said that there are certain species, like monarchs, that are very carefully studied, so most insects are not, and the more data that we can give, the more likely it is we can come up with with ways of mitigating species loss. So this research is being used by scientists at nearby Georgetown University to create the models for the potential risk of current or future human impacts on the feeding and breeding habits and habitat vulnerability of the butterflies. So insect species are often neglected in favor of research on more charismatic species like birds and mammals. So citizen science can help make up for those biases in research fields within academia. So if you do, if this interests you, it kind of excites you, definitely go give your data, go give your information. If you're like an avid insect watcher and you like to see all their, recoveries and see what they do, definitely download those apps, either Nest Watch or eBird, so that you can give the scientists the information that they need, and hopefully just better our environment and all the animals. So it's time for a little bit of a break, but don't go anywhere. When I get back from the break, I'm going to be sharing with you a really awesome love story that you're not going to want to miss out on. I also have the key ingredient in coronavirus tests and where that comes from, which is kind of cool. So lots of fun information to be shared. Don't you dare go anywhere. I will be right back.
The GSMC Life and Happiness podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to GSMC, America's Still Beautiful podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Alyssa Jo. Okay, we are back from the break, and I have so many more feel-good, positive stories to share with you today. So let me just jump right back into it. So here we go. There has been a new technology, which what they are calling could be the world's most disruptive technology. Okay, so natural organisms in soil can power lights with this bio battery. So a Spanish biotech company is looking to generate renewable energy from the soil, which our homes are built on. So it was described as the world's most disruptive startup in 2016 by Google and BO, which creates batteries that utilize soil microbes to generate electricity in a simple yet ingenious way. So when the ground in which the battery is set is irrigated or receives rain, nutrients and microbes in the soil that feed on decaying plant matter leach into the battery, where their feeding activity creates protons and electrons. So when it's combined with oxygen flowing in through the holes in the battery, the process generates enough electricity to power lights, screens, or small appliances. Isn't that cool? So the goal of BO is to scale up their technology until their soil-powered units could generate power for an entire house, which might not be so difficult since the manufacturing doesn't require any toxic or rare earth minerals like some PV solar panels do. So BO is using potted plants in much of their research because plants expel the excess energy from their photosynthesis through the roots, which can be captured to power small devices. So currently a house is a bit beyond the reach of the founder, Pablo Vidarti. However, he has created several innovative ways to showcase his ideas and hopefully generate the data and capital needed to scale it up. So one of the showcases is living installation, for which plants are used like biological on and off switch. So after receiving a certain radio frequency, he has discovered that certain potted plants can produce energy through his systems and be used like living electrical switches, powering on lights, screens, music, and even extending Wi-Fi for use in home or retail environment. So the 12 working on the Spanish island of Ibiza, he says that his panels are powering the outdoor lighting installed throughout the company's property, which turn on at night. Unlike solar panels, which require batteries to store energy for use when the sun isn't shining, or wind turbines that stop moving without a breeze, soil microbes never sleep, and they never stop generating energy. So the flow of power is consistent, even in the middle of the night or on a windless day. So the BO panel will always save water beneath a garden or lawn because it's generating extra H2O that is expelled in the soil. And it's the 100% renewable energy panels, which currently can generate 3 watts per square meter, do not interrupt the natural landscape above the ground. So many city planners are eager to use them for powering lights, especially in parks. So they say this technology itself has the potential to be very, very cheap. After all, it just requires graphite and carbon-based substances that are really easy to obtain, are very abundant, and very cheap as well. So if you actually want to find out some more information about this, they have a pretty cool video. It's called BO, Electricity from Nature, and the BO is spelled B-I-O-O, but it's pronounced as B-O. So go check that out if you want some more information. I thought this was such a cool new technology. Now, I mentioned before the break I was going to share with you the key ingredient in coronavirus tests and where it's coming from. And they say the key ingredient in coronavirus tests comes from Yellowstone's heated pools. So a rather kind of interesting observation. It happened in the hot springs and boiling pools of Yellowstone National Park by a scientist in 1966, and it would lead to the discovery of a molecule that now, 54 years later, is being used to fuel the testing process for the viral RNA of a virus responsible for a civilization-altering pandemic. So it was the mats of squishy cyanobacteria clinging to the rocks in pools of water that can reach a boiling point that created a revolution in science. So proving that life could indeed survive in conditions which used to be considered unattainable for even bacteria. So they say, what use could there be in looking for living bacteria in hot springs and boiling pools at Yellowstone National Park? Well, along with creating the trigger for the founding of another dimension of life sciences, it actually led to another foundational discovery. So it's a heat-resistant enzyme called DNA polymers, which to this day allows scientists to accurately test for COVID-19 by replicating DNA at will. So in the 1980s, American biochemist Carrie Mullis found it was possible to mimic the way DNA copies itself, and that if she marked regions of the organism with primers, small segments of DNA, and then applied DNA polymers, the enzyme would turn the primers into whatever she wanted to copy. So to do this, the sample needed to undergo a circular heating and cooling process that damaged the DNA polymers. It could still work, but it was slow, and she says, like continually heating a piece of meat, it caused breakdowns in the proteins that would eventually end the process altogether. So she realized that the Thermus aquaticus, a species of the cyanobacteria discovered by Brock in Mushroom Springs, Yellowstone, it spent all of its time in the water that averaged 191 degrees Fahrenheit, and that DNA polymers from its cells might be resistant to the heat needed to activate that replicating process. So sure enough, her hunch was right, and it's that process that made from the enzyme found inside the Thermus aquaticus that is being used to test individuals positively or negatively for COVID-19. So after the viral RNA of the SARS-CoV-2 is converted to DNA, the replicating method of hers that is applied to the areas where the virus is detected, endlessly replicating the cells on a test sample until the presence of the virus is clear or not. So if you go to Yellowstone and read some of the placards surrounding the iconic bunches of geothermal features, you'll actually notice that one explains the discovery of the cyanobacteria and how it changed scientists' understanding of the fundamental components of life. So that discovery has been expanded by further uncoverings of microbes living in undersea undersea thermal vents and has put together a picture of what microbial life might need to be to survive on other planets. So until that day, the kind of bacteria behind the discoveries of Brock and Mullis are fueling the testing process that's at the heart of the world's COVID-19 response. How interesting is that? I thought that was such a cool thing. I had no idea where any of this comes from, but that's another positive thing about the pandemic. We're learning new discoveries and kind of how everything comes all together. And I think it is so cool and exciting. All right, well, it's time for another break, but don't go anywhere because when we get back, I have that love story I wanted to share with you guys. I also have this kind of cool way that if you're feeling stressed, this is kind of a fun, cool way that you might be able to de-stress a little bit, find your zen. And then I don't want to jump in too much about the election, but I do have some positive things that kind of surrounded the election that I think we can all kind of be happy about. So I wanted to share those to round off today's episode. So there's lots of fun things coming for you guys to round off today's episode. I am super excited to share them. So let's take a break so I can get on back with all these feel-good, positive stories for you. So don't go anywhere. I will be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the last stretch of today's episode. I'm going to jump right back into it. All right, so I want to start off with this love story that I have to share with you. I am a sucker for a good love story. So here we go. What's the best way to get yourself rolling in the morning? So maybe a steaming cup of hot coffee, a breakfast sandwich, or a made-to-order drive-through romance. So, a Dunkin' general manager in Oklahoma City became enamored with a regular who would order a large hot coffee with cream and sugar and a sausage, egg, and cheese sandwich in the mornings. She says, I could never forget his smile. I always notice it. He had dimples when he smiled. His eyes sparkle. It turned out that the attraction was actually mutual, but the customer, his name is John Thompson, was shy about asking her out. So by the time he finally woke up the nerve to place an order for a date, she turned the tables on him by giving him her number. The couple knew from their very first kind of encounter that they found together what was the real deal. So about 3 weeks later, he actually popped the question, of course, in the Dunkin' parking lot. So after a 7th-month engagement, the couple exchanged vows in a donut-themed wedding ceremony at the same drive-thru where they first set eyes on one another. They say, I am so thankful for everything Dunkin' has given me, from my job to lifelong friends, and now my husband. When John and I were planning our big day, we decided there was no better place to say I do than right where we met. So there you go, true love and donuts. You know, what could be sweeter than that? Isn't that such a cool little fun love story? I'm a sucker for things like that, so I had to share that with you guys. Now, if you've been feeling stressed at all these days, which I think all of us have maybe a little bit, this is kind of this cool way that you can maybe get back into your zen. So there is a live stream of polar bears in the wild that has been created to help us all zen out this winter. So the live cams show the bears' migration in Canada and how they survive in the Arctic tundra and with their cubs. So lucky viewers may also get a front row seat to Arctic foxes, seasonal birds, displays of the aurora boreals. This project is in collaboration between the conservation nonprofit Polar Bears International and explore.org. So every year around now, 100 of the iconic animals meet on the shores of Hudson Bay near the town of Churchill to wait for the ice that lets them head out to sea and seek out seals for sustenance through the winter. So for this season, Churchill is known as the polar bear capital of the world, and the town even has its own polar bear jail for naughty teen bears that have been causing trouble in the town, and they're released once the sea ice is thick enough for them to head out into the bay. So the ice-free season is nearly a month longer than it was during the 1980s, but there is hope, they say. So Krista Wright, who is the executive director of PBI, she says if we act swiftly and collectively to make a bold transition to renewable energy and away from fossil fuels, we can preserve polar bears for future generations. They say that we hope Polar Bear Week encourages people to pause, appreciate, and listen to this species. So you can find this live cam. If you go to explore.org, you will find a bunch of information there. You can also find educational webcasts that can be found at Polar Bears International. So they always have the polar bears. You can see Arctic foxes and seasonal birds and all that fun stuff, and they say it's a great way to just get into your zen. This is also a great thing to do inside, you know, if you have kids or just friends, you want to put it on the background while you're cooking dinner. I think it's so cool to see wild animals live, and it just brings you a sense of like calming. It's just, polar bears are so cool. I'm also from Canada, so maybe I'm biased. Is that a biased thing? Anyways, head on over to explore.org or Polar Bears International so you can check out these webcams and go into your zen this winter. All right, so like I mentioned, I don't want to jump heavily into the election, but what I do want to do is just bring to your attention some of the positive things that we can all, I think, be happy about during this election. So this election actually saw the highest voter turnout in over a century. So the U.S. Elections Project, which tracks voter turnout, it has found more than 160 million Americans voted all in all. So that's representing 66.9% of the potential eligible voting population. So this marks the largest election participation since 1900. Pretty cool, right? There is also a huge number of young people registered and cast their votes. So more than 15 million people have turned 18 since the last presidential election, and they've been registering to vote. So in Idaho, Minnesota, Georgia, and Vermont, youth voters registered exceeded the 2016 numbers by over a third. So the Center for Information Research and Civic Learning Engagement has been tackling early and absentee voting by young people aged 18 to 29, and it found that more than 7 million youths across the country had already cast their ballots by October 27th, including over 4 million in 14 key states. Americans who were too young to vote actually signed up as poll workers this year. I did share a story about this earlier on an episode, I think maybe a couple weeks ago now, but just saying how the youth have stepped up to be the poll workers to protect our elderly from the pandemic. So in the 2018 midterm elections, there was roughly 58% of poll workers were aged 61 or older. So young citizens actually stepped up to volunteer this year to eliminate older people's risk, of course, at being exposed to COVID-19. And more than 37,000 young people, some of whom are too young to even vote, signed up to be poll workers on November 3rd through the Poll Hero Project. So I thought that was pretty cool. Foreign interference was not the issue that it was in the 2016 election. So despite worries of disinformation and hacking attempts coming from Russia, China, and Iran, the acting Department of Homeland Security Secretary, Chad Wolf, was able to confidently announce on November 3rd that we have no indications that a foreign actor has succeeded in compromising or affecting the actual votes cast in this election. So there you have it. Another positive thing. Let's see here. Native Americans made history. So they say 6 candidates winning seats in the 117th Congress. So 3 women, 3 men have been voted in, 3 Democrats, and 3 Republicans. 2 from Oklahoma, 2 from New Mexico, 1 from Kansas, and 1 from Hawaii. So that's including 2 Cherokee, 1 Chickasaw, 1 Ho-Chunk, 1 Laguna and Jamez Pueblo, and 1 Native Hawaiian. So that is really big, awesome news. They are also saying Cori Bush, who is a nurse and single mother from Springfield, became the first Black woman elected to Congress from the state of Missouri. She tweeted a photo standing in front of a painting of Shirley Chisholm, who became the first African-American woman elected to the U.S. Congress in 1969, representing New York. So that's pretty cool. Let's see here. The right to repair car law was significantly expanded in Massachusetts. So in Massachusetts, a right to repair law, being called the most advanced in the world, was voted in. So from 2022 onwards, car manufacturers in the Bay State will have to share repair data beyond just dealers, so to consumers and repair stores. And this law will allow car owners and local mechanics back into the repair process instead of restricting repairs to dealerships and dealership partner shops. So that's another positive thing. Mississippi voted to legalize medical marijuana. So voters in the Magnolia State overwhelmingly approved the citizen-led Initiative 65, so making it the 35th state to establish a medical marijuana program. States across the country are going to see restrictions on drugs across. They are also saying Montana, South Dakota, New Jersey, and Arizona voted to legalize recreational weed. Adults in these states will be able to legally buy recreational weed in the future, with tax revenue in Arizona going to community colleges and public safety. So there are currently 11 states have legalized full adult marijuana use. And my last little positive thing for you, Oregon became the first state to decriminalize the possession of small amount of hard drugs. So according to the Washington Post, such a law lays the groundwork for people with substance abuse issues to receive the treatment they need instead of the time in jail. So the state is also the first to legalize the therapeutic use of psychedelic mushrooms as well. So there you have it. I just thought those were some kind of generalized, maybe positive things that hopefully some of us can all relate to or feel happy about. So I wanted to share those with you without getting too far into all of the nit and gritty. So there you have it. Thank you so much for listening to GSMC, America's Still Beautiful podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Alyssa Jo. I had so much fun sharing the stories on today's episode. So thank you so much for being here. Do not forget to hit that subscribe button. I got new episodes out every single Monday and Thursday. Don't forget to head over to our social media, hit like and follow on those. We got Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And don't forget to leave a 5-star review because it helps out a ton and it sure does put a smile on my face. So stay happy, stay positive, and spread kindness every single chance that you get. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts, America's Still Beautiful podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows. From the GSMC Podcast Network, from social media news to marketing news, and even weird news, the GSMC Podcast Network has you covered. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts, America's Still Beautiful podcast.